Let's see. Well, it looks like we are live. Hi, everyone. Hi, dear Facebook friends and followers. Once again, this is Anna Stepchenko, your Florida real estate professional, and welcome to my real estate educational series. Today, I'm continuing my condo talk journey with the Sunny Isles Commissioner and a real estate attorney, Dana Goldman. Hi, Dana.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. I so much enjoy this and having an ability and a platform to provide resources to our community.
Dana, thank you so much. I'm very happy to have you back. And before we start talking about our today's topics, I want to touch base on our last week live. I think it was a true success. We got a lot of feedback, even a lot of questions from the audience. So let's continue discovering what condominium topics have to offer.
Wonderful.
So today, I would like to focus on two common yet very essential topics when it comes to Florida Condominium Act. And the first question I would like to discuss with you is, should I be concerned how the condominium is managed? In other words, is there an effective oversight as per how the condos are managed? Is there a way to obtain preliminary information on that before, for example, you make a purchase?
Okay, so from a statutory standpoint, it's really the obligation of the association to manage, and that's specifically the management and maintenance and operation is really through the association through its board of directors, but certainly, and especially with some of the larger condominium associations, they can always delegate certain of those responsibilities to a manager. So the association can either hire a manager who's a licensed manager that is licensed through the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, or the association can hire a management company. And so if the condominium contains to more than 10 units or has an annual budget in excess of $100,000, the manager must be licensed as a community association manager, or it's commonly referred to as a CAM. And that is regulated, again, under the statutes, Chapter 468. But when you get to the larger question of what's better for the association, should an association have a manager who's basically on staff or through some contract or employee, or whether you should have an outside management company help to manage that condominium association, that's a slightly different question and presents slightly different issues. And so if you're concerned, so go ahead, if you're concerned about that, so let's talk about that.
Well, yeah, basically my next follow-up question is definitely derived from my original question, and it's related to rising voices, basically unit owners who confront condominium fraud and corruption practices, because unfortunately Florida is notorious for being one of the fraud states in the United States, and despite the fact that we are one of the most desired places on earth to live in, there are some fraud issues that on many occasions are encountered. So there are a lot of complaints from unit owners, from condominium residents who confront unethical behavior of the board of directors and of the condo association in general. And I would like to address a question of a lady who watched our live a week ago, and that's what she had to say. We are having a lot of fraud with the board of directors. Any topic that includes special assessment, do owners have any rights to complain when board of directors clearly votes on projects that will not benefit the owners? Who to complain when DBPR doesn't want to do anything?
Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question. So let's go back to the manager question. So when you're talking about fraud and abuse, right? that particular question has many sub-issues, right? So the manager itself, whether it's through a management company or an individual, a natural person who's a licensee, they have certain license obligations, just like you are licensed and you have your own code of ethics as a realtor and any other licensee. So they have to stay within those confines. But fraud is something completely different, right? If there is a fraud suspected, you have an element of proof, right? And if you're going to make a complaint to the DBPR, who is perpetrating that fraud and what type of fraud is it? Is the manager? Is some embezzlement of funds or something happening at the manager level? Or if the board is approving a contract, so that's not really fraud, right? Because there's a broad criteria or a broad band, which is called the business judgment rule. So if a board ratifies or approves a contract, that in itself is within the reasonable business judgment of that. Typically is that case. That's a little different from saying, well, there was outright theft, or there was self-dealing, or conflict of interest, or failure to properly disclose some sort of an affiliation or a relationship with the vendor, right? So it's
Sure.
a multitude of things, right? But specifically as to the management company, at least if it's a manager or management, they're supposed to have some level of independence from that and have some level of responsibility. Let's put it that way. So in the case where you got that request, so it's really hard to say on the surface as to why, if a complaint was lodged to the DBPR, for whatever reason, the DBPR didn't follow up. Perhaps it was an element of the documentation that was provided. Perhaps it's part of the business judgment. Perhaps the DBPR didn't have jurisdiction over that matter, but it could be a variety of things. What I will say, and one of the issues that I'm very interested in as an official and also as a condominium lawyer, is that the laws have yet to improve and to be strengthened so that there really are teeth in our state statutes that if a fraud is committed or there is a criminal act, that we have better laws that strengthen that. And that's been a little bit of a challenge politically over the last couple of years, because typically the legislators, they don't want to clamp down and create stronger criminal penalties for what they consider to be volunteer boards.
Dana, one of the Facebook watchers, Anna, is asking, as we speak, she's asking a question. She says, "Hi, we suspect large corruption in our association. How do we get the authorities to investigate?" And then she says that the board of directors gives contracts to their friends, inflating contracts.
Okay, so a couple things. Okay, I think it's a great question. Something I'm very passionate about, very interested in. It's a core interest. I hear from constituents all the time. I've been in this space for many years, and so the ground rule: if you suspect some malfeasance, something going wrong, it's a question of finding the evidence of that. So the first stop for any interested unit owner is to gather the official records, the financial records, the documentation. Once you have that, you can always hire. Again, it's expensive and it's time consuming, but you have to get the documents and the records. So a suspicion doesn't help, right? and then hiring a forensic accountant to analyze that information. And like anything else, once you have those documents, not so easy to get sometimes, even though
Sure.
the Condominium Act has strong value system and strong protections and strong core protection for unit owners getting access to information. That is the key, and that's the starting place. If you suspect something's going wrong, you have to get the data and the information. And there are a variety of places you can go to, right? If it's a financial type fraud, that is something that the local police department, there's a bureau, there's a local police department in your municipality. But again, gotta have proof, gotta have the records, you gotta demonstrate that actual corruption or fraud's been going on. Then, of course, there's a at the county level, there's a bureau. That's
know if your food is
okay.
If you're ready to eat because your food's done.
In a couple minutes, honey. Okay, so it's dinner time.
What a beautiful
Hey,
child you have.
It's live. It's live.
It's live, and it's, you know, homeschooling, so it's all good.
It's all good. So then there are obviously agencies, but it's really, if it's a criminal level of corruption, then again, the documentation, the proof, and the police department, who probably has somebody on staff that can help to identify that. And of course, the DBPR, they have limited jurisdiction, but if it's an outright criminal component, then that's something that goes literally under criminal investigation. The sad reality is that the DBPR does not have enough investigators. If it's a criminal action, they'll refer it down to, again, a police department. The police departments are probably, and the state's attorney's office, they would get involved in something if, again, it's of a large magnitude or a large amount. But if there are inside dealings like taking on a contract and the failure to disclose that, hey, my brother or my uncle was the vendor on that contract, or I have a share in that, I think that's a little bit different. And that's something that you could probably file a complaint with the DBPR. Now, there is, of course, a strong constituent or resident effort to really, expand the level of review at the DBPR. As you can imagine, they get thousands and thousands of complaints, and they can't always prosecute everything, but you have to work through your information, and you have to work through the system. And I think the ultimate response is, if you don't like that board, get your friends and vote for a new one, right? Isn't that the ultimate fix?
No, absolutely it is. But when it comes to, for example, special assessments that are being imposed, and they have been imposed and approved, then it's hard to fix it, something that's been done. And even if you re-elect the board, you will still have to deal with the special assessment.
Right. So, is there corruption? Of course, some condo boards and some associations are, but again, it's a question of proof, and sometimes it can be very challenging. And without more than just knowing intuitively, it's hard to give that information. If you don't have the information, you can't give the information over to the authorities, basically. And that's why forensic accountants and again, good analysis of the financial records. Now, I will say that kickbacks are amongst the most common complained of activity, right? But they're mutually beneficial. Very hard to prove a kickback, and that's always been the difficulty, because it may be a way of doing business for some, but it's certainly not something that somebody would admit to unless they were under oath, or again, you would need somebody to create an affidavit, or and hard to prove, hard to get the evidence of a kickback.
And here, Anna, the Facebook watcher who was asking the previous question, she added that our board voted on a contract for a roof for $880K. In just 2 months, it became $1.5 million. So basically, in 2 months, they doubled the cost of that roof repair.
Mm-hmm. So again, you have, that is not in and of itself a criminal activity, right? Because maybe the roofer went in and the scope of work had to expand. I've seen this time and again where condo associations go through some balcony restoration, and all of a sudden they see all sorts of issues, and then you have change orders and increased scope of services. And again, the mere fact of just an increase in services or cost is not in and of itself, I think, a criminal act, but it's really, it demonstrates that perhaps the damage or the roof needed additional repair, right?
But I guess, the bottom line of this entire conversation is to gather information. And if you feel that your condo association is not acting in a good faith, you need to come up with the actual evidence, with the actual proof, in order for you to proceed with any further litigation in this matter.
Right. And it's difficult. And I understand very well that in many cases, associations or board members, they'll throw firebombs at the ability to get documents, or there's always a retaliatory component to this, right? So what happens, and that's where it breaks down, right? Unit owners request documents and information, and then all of a sudden there's some retaliation. So there's always a personal side to some of these situations, and that's why ultimately it's important to not, if you think something's wrong, don't work in isolation. You have to have like-minded people around. And again, sure, the boards have this large umbrage of the business judgment rule, where that's within their business judgment. But again, if you think something's wrong, you have to pursue it, and you have to really gather all the data.
So basically, information is the most valuable tool when it comes to these sort of questions. Well, Dana, thank you so much for elaborating on this topic. And the second question, the second topic, the second segment of our today's broadcast is fines. Fines enforcement by the condo association. In my opinion, it's a very essential question in today's reality, because with the emergency order that enforces facial coverings in the common areas of the condominiums, a lot of clients of mine in particular were complaining that they've been fined $100, $200 for either not wearing a mask or not wearing a mask properly. I witnessed an incident when a condominium resident was fined $100 because her face covering was not covering the nose. So in many people's opinions, sometimes this imposition of fines, it gets to an absurd level. And my question to you is there any way for the unit residents to have power and protection to defend their rights and to appeal such fines if, in their opinion, those fines were imposed unfairly?
So the fining process is really driven by statute, and it's also driven by your governing documents. So the association can't really impose a fine unless there is a rule, it was properly adopted, there's some measure of notice and opportunity for a hearing, and it's an independent violations committee typically that's appointed through the board, but you go through some sort of a process. So I'm sure that that the board basically takes cue from that committee, but they they make the ultimate decision. So it's a process, right? So nobody is going to just see somebody without a mask on and then just all of a sudden give out a $100 fine, right? It has to have steps in the way. So if you challenge it, they can impose that fine if there's a finding of a violation. And again, it's done through the proper statutory way, but certainly they have to try to collect it, or if they can't, so they have the right to suspend some of your rights to the common areas. They can suspend some of their rights, but in the board's vein, right? They want to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. So it's within the board's purview or right to put this rule out, right? And if you violate that rule, there could be a penalty for that.
Absolutely, but I heard from particular people, friends and clients of mine, that they have a feeling that sometimes such rules are enforced selectively, meaning that some condominium residents get fined, whereas other condominium residents do not get fined for not complying with the same order. So is there any way to actually fight for justice when it comes to these occurrences?
Well, you can always make the argument that there's, some level of selective enforcement, meaning if there's a rule or a covenant or restriction that is only done for one resident and not for others, and there are 10 people who make the violation and only the association goes after that one individual out of 10, you could make the argument, but it's a defense. It's not, you can't sue the board or challenge the board, in an offensive posture for selectively enforcing the rules. You can use that as a defense to say, if you impose this on me, you have to do an even-handed job for everybody.
Well, so, Dana, I guess it is what it is. I mean, it's really a matter of the location, because from my personal and professional observation, for example, the same $100 fine rule for not wearing a mask properly is not applied with the same capacity at all condominiums. Some condos are more, I would say, loyal when it comes to this order, and some condos are very strict. So it really goes with the territory and with the management, I guess.
Right, and certainly every association, they have a certain bandwidth, and they have the certain ability to impose those rules for the health and the safety and the well-being of the residents. So long as those rules are not arbitrary or capricious, it's within their right to adopt those rules. But again, your governing documents will state how those rules get adopted. You have to give notice to the residents, and you have to properly adopt them. That's something where was the rule properly adopted, and again, that's within that board's discretion. Remember, boards adopt the rules, but they certainly don't hold the weight of, say, a covenant that's in your declaration of condominium.
So
they're within their right to adopt these boards, these rules, as long as they're not, again, arbitrary or capricious.
So bottom line is that it is of very essential importance to study the rules and regulations of the condominium before you make that decision to either buy or rent. And that's why I would like to to say a disclaimer that in this series, we are not trying to dissuade people from buying or renting condominiums. We are just trying to give pointers as per what segments they should pay attention to before they make that step of buying or renting, because then you will be locked in and it will be much harder for you to deal with all of these regulatory issues.
It is, and it's the same thing as in the management aspect, right? So if you want to know how your building's being managed before you before you buy, you want to know, is it self-managed? Do they have a good management company? What's the relationship like with the manager? In the same way, you want to know what kind of rules. Is it a very restrictive environment, or is it more relaxed? Of course, you want to know, because that and rules, especially because they can be adopted typically within 30 days. They can become effective within 30 days of being adopted. And you want to know, you want to know what you're facing as a resident. Some people don't like all the restrictive rules, but when you buy in a unit in a condominium, you have to live and subject you subordinate your rights for the larger welfare, or for the good of the entire, all the units in the condominium. So you have to have that expectation that there will be some rules that are going to restrict your behavior and your actions.
Absolutely. And I would like to remind to all of the people who are watching us or will be watching us that in the event you buy a condominium, the seller has to provide you a copy of the current condo docs, including the rules and regulations, the budget, the reserves, and legally you have 3 days to review these documents. If it's a resale, right, Dana?
3 days on a resale, 15 days if it's an original sale. So again, you have rescission rights based on that. You get the receipt for condo documents, or you get the governing documents, and you have to go through that and see, is this the kind of place? Are these the rules that I can live with?
Deal with, absolutely.
What what it's like any level of informed consent. Know what you're buying into before you buy into it.
Absolutely. Well, Dana, thank you so much. It was another informative live broadcast. I believe that our watchers have more clarity today when it comes to management of the condominiums, when it comes to fines. So thank you so much for your contribution, and I will be very happy to see you in my live series next week.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me, and have a great evening.